Hello, it's Todd Evans. You're joining me today in my studio, and I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about watercolours, just a few hints and tips, very basic, what watercolour likes doing best. I thought I would start this session with a little introduction to materials and think first about the actual paints themselves. Watercolour paints you can buy in ready-made sets with what they call pans of colour, and these are half-size pans. You can get some that are a little bit bigger. This is in a metal tin, but it might come in plastic tins, and you can get small little field sketching sizes up to something that's bigger like this, and some that have multiple layers. What I would say is don't overface yourself. All the colours in the world aren't going to make you a better painter. You're better to start with fewer number and get to know them really well and how the mixes work. If you are buying yourself a little tin, like something like this, make sure you get something that's got plenty of areas for mixing colour up, so that you can make reasonable sized pools of colour. These little wells here, I could make a reasonable amount of puddle of colour up to use without running out halfway through a passage. So these are pans of colour. If I was going to be using this and I was out sketching or painting somewhere, a little spray mist of water, or just drop some water on from your water jug, and they will moisten up while you start perhaps sketching your scene or whatever. They very readily release the colour, and I would also advise, if you're starting off, buy the best quality paints that you can, artist quality paints if you can. Have fewer of them but better quality. These ones here are Rembrandt. As well as buying painting pans, you might opt to buy them in tubes. This is my little collection of tubes. Artist quality Winsor & Newton is what I go for. There's all sorts of different brands and they'll all have their fans, but I tend to go for something like Winsor & Newton, long history, very successful, very readily available. If I was going to be painting in the afternoon, ran out of a colour, I could easily go along to my local art shop and buy myself another tube and not have to wait for something to be delivered. If you can't afford to treat yourself to a selection of the Winsor & Newton, Cotman is a good, what they call student brand, but again, you know, sort of highly recognised. If you do decide to use tubes, it might be when you, if you have a pan of colours, this is the one I use mostly. This started off with pans of colour. When they ran out, I've now used tubes of colour which I've squirted into the old pans. So the pans are still there, but as I've used the colour, I've squirted into them and use the palette that way. Again, this one, Frank Herring watercolour palette, and so it folds up, and again I've got lovely deep selection of wells to mix my colours in. If you haven't got one with the pans and you're using, sometimes I do use what they call a daisy wheel palette, and again you can see where I've squirted the colour out up into the little corners. If you do use a palette fresh like this, I always advise that you squirt the colour up and off to one side. If you put it slap bang in the middle and then you add your water and your brush, you're committing yourself to mixing the whole of that little squirt of colour up. Otherwise, when you put your brush in there, if you've got colour here and you might pick up pure pigment and then bring it to your paper and have streaks. So put it up off to the side, then when you bring your water in, you can just pull some colour down into your water mix and make it as strong or as weak as you want. So I'm not committing myself to using the whole of that. I can make it as strong or weak as I want, and I can make a nice big puddle of it, and it's all going to be mixed in. For the session today, I will be using the daisy wheel, but we're not using lots and lots of singing colours. We'll keep it simple. Paper here is what's known as a Bockingford watercolour paper made by St Cuthbert's Mill. It's really user friendly, it's not too expensive, but it is good quality. It's what we call 140 pounds in weight and has what they call a knot finish, so it does have, I don't know if you can see in the light maybe, it does have a little bit of texture, and you know, it can take quite a bit of a beating without too much hassle. And I also advise, if I've got new students in the class, that you tape your paper around all four sides, so more or less half on, half off. This is just masking tape, which you can get more expensive brands, or you can just get cheap and cheerful from places like Homebase or your DIY stores. So tape paper all the way around. The reason I say advise that is because any paper when it's wet will swell, and even this is a good weight, 140 pounds, quite a good weight, you will still get what they call a bit of buckling where the paper ripples. As it dries, if I've got the tape round, it's providing a little bit of tension around equally around the page, and as it dries it will shrink and flatten again and be workable and won't leave you with irritating buckles. The other reason is when you do your masterpiece, and that day will come and you think, I will get this framed, if you've painted wall to wall with your watercolour, when you carefully peel off and away from your image, you will actually be left with a lovely white edge, which is very satisfying, but it also gives your framer an edge to work into when he's putting the mount on the frame round. If you don't have that and you've got it loose, then you might have painted something near the edge, but suddenly if the frame is taking that much, it could end up too close to the edge. So tape all the way round, save yourself the hassle. Brushes are very individual things. There's hundreds out there on the market, from pure squirrel hairs, sables. Often I find I'm quite happy just using a sort of mix. It might be you know, synthetic and hair mix. Even some of these the synthetic ones work very well. They're very robust, they keep points well. To me, that's one of the most important things, is that actually your brush will still come to a nice, very nice point. Sometimes beginning watercolourists, they feel safe by having very small brushes because they feel that they'll be able to keep control. Very small brushes have their place, but I generally advise to get something a bit bigger and use the biggest brush you can for the size that you're working in. So I have a variety of brushes, and you can get flats as well. These sort of square ones come in all sorts of sizes. They can be very useful if you're doing buildings and things. This one is particularly useful for doing big washes in the background. Obviously something with a finer point, you can make smaller marks, fill in smaller shapes. I think all we're really going to need for the moment is, I will go with that one. That's a size 10. So go for the bigger brushes and something that you can fill bigger amounts in. Right, brushes, palette. Let's just mix up a little bit of paint quickly. I'm just going to go for something that you'll be able to see easily, and I think I'll go for this, which I think is Dioxazine Violet. Could be wrong. See how readily it releases the colour. This one isn't actually in a pan, it's one I've added. I've got Permanent Rose there and Lemon Yellow in that one. Again, I put it up in the corner to give me a nice big area that I can use. That's nice and strong. If you're painting a picture and you're not familiar with your colours, or you want to check the strength, then a little spare piece of paper and just check the strength on your spare sheet before you add it in, especially if you're mixing more than one colour together, to make sure you're getting the right tint, tone, the right colour. Right, the first thing, the other thing about watercolours that until you're familiar with them might catch you out is the fact that they do dry a lot lighter. Some colours dry extremely light, others less so, but they will all dry lighter than they look when they're dark. So bear that in mind. If you've got a picture you're painting, you're adding wet paint to dry paint, that when you first lay the new fresh colour down, it can be a bit startling, but when you get familiar with it, you start to guess how much lighter it's going to dry. That's why watercolour is one of the most tricky mediums. There's so many variables, but it is so seductive. One other bit of equipment that is vital right from the offset is some kitchen towel. Use it for mopping up, for taking moisture out of your brush. If you lay a bit of colour down, you can quickly, let's just put a bit of colour down. If you lay a bit of colour down and you think, ah, no, blot it, and it'll all but disappear. So kitchen towel, essential.